So there's a very interesting story that is trending on social media where some people are saying that Geno Smith apparently tried to fight someone on the sideline of a youth football game. It was a 7-on-7 game in which Geno Smith was apparently a coach for. And this is trending. And, the headlines to me are absolutely misleading. I don't think it's really a big deal at all, but this is something that is trending. So it is something I do want to talk about. So if you guys have not heard, this actually happened, I believe, 2 days ago. This was posted, I think it went viral on TikTok, but basically, this is kind of some of the headlines that we're getting out of some of these different reports. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. People are basically saying that Geno Smith was trying to fight someone, right? So ML Football is saying that it's trending that Raiders quarterback Geno Smith apparently got into a fight at a football game this weekend and was going back and forth. That's why I get paid the big bucks. It's kind of interesting because I'm going to let you guys watch the video here in a second, but one of the absolute most mind-boggling things to me is how people can just kind of, take an article, post whatever in the actual article they want, which might be 100% true, but then they'll title it something super, super, super misleading. And people actually just read the title and think that, hey, this is kind of what happened. Because some of the comments on some of these posts, right, some of these things regarding Geno Smith, the comments are ridiculous. With people saying things like, why is Geno Smith fighting someone? Why is he bragging about making all this money? Like, what the hell is wrong with Geno Smith? But you don't really get any of that from this video. And I even went and searched and looked for if there was anybody that was actually at the event that might have, seen something or said something. And I did find one person, really didn't say anything. There was absolutely no fight. So again, to me, it just doesn't really make sense. But I'm going to let you guys watch the video and then we'll talk about this on the other side.
That's why they pay me the big bucks. That's why I get paid the big bucks. That's why they bring the big bucks to me. That's why they pay me the big bucks, nigga. I do it. That's why they pay me the big bucks.
So there you guys have it, right? You guys obviously see the video in which Geno Smith is saying, that's why I get paid the big bucks. He's kind of going down the sideline. He kind of gets stopped by security, and that's kind of the end of the video. But at no point was a punch thrown. At no point was a fist, thrown. At no point was there any sort of fight. But it is absolutely wild to me how these headlines, people actually just believe it without actually looking into it and actually thinking, using their brain and think. Because again, some of the slander I'm seeing about Geno Smith right now in some of these comments is kind of ridiculous. To me, I really don't think this is a big deal. And I'll even take it a step further. Geno Smith made $35 million last year, and he's made $35 million for multiple years at this point. He'll make $35 million this year, next year, and the year after that. But yeah, he's spending a Saturday at a 7-on-7 in Dade County, which is where he's from, coaching the youth, right? That's kind of what he's putting his effort into. He's essentially giving back. To me, that speaks more volumes than some of these headlines. Geno Smith has spent so much time working with so many different athletes. He was, I believe, a couple weeks back working out with some Alabama wide receivers, something he does not have to do, but he still does it because he actually enjoys this. Pete Carroll said this, but if you guys have followed the Seahawks, or at least listened to some of, what we had heard of Geno Smith while he was with the Seahawks, it's pretty similar. The guy's a hard-ass worker. He puts the effort in, and he is competitive as hell. And that competitive part is what kind of, shows to me in this video, which is, he most likely won, and there was some sort of trash talking kind of going on back and forth. In fact, Geno Smith actually tweeted and said this is kind of what happened. Geno Smith said that, having fun with the game I love, but man, the need for clicks and negativity takes away from the great event that happened this past weekend. All the kids had fun and competed. All around great event. This is how we talk in Dade County. I'm sorry you might not understand. Carry on. So there you guys have it, right? Geno Smith is basically saying this is how we talk in Dade County. And I definitely understand exactly what Geno Smith is saying. Not everywhere around the country, around the world, is everything like just roses and flowers and happy. Regardless of the actual person you are, there's areas where you can actually be open and actually be the type of person you are, right? You can actually not have to be politically correct about everything. Right? You can go out and say, this is why I get paid the big bucks, because maybe someone else said something to you and you're just responding now naturally, right? In a competitive environment. But at no point do I see a guy trying to fight someone. At no point, again, do I see, punches being thrown. But again, it's just crazy to me that we have these misleading headlines where people are trying to slander essentially Geno Smith's name. And just to kind of get away from this story a little bit and just kind of talk about Geno, I was thinking about this just a couple days ago. The Raiders are at this point where, I've realized now that not having a quarterback, like a guy that can, realistically just read a defense and make good passes, not having that for the last 2 seasons has been it's been an experience, to be 100% honest with you guys. Now, I haven't been, I'm not the biggest Derek Carr fan, but there's a big difference between Derek Carr and the other guys we've had, right? The 3 guys that have been quarterbacks for us for the last 2 years. Massive difference between those guys. And again, I'm not a huge Derek Carr fan, right? And I say that only because I recognize how much better Geno Smith's going to allow this team to be. Because there were games last year where the defense actually did a pretty good job. And, you get that stop when you need that stop. And now it's up to the offense to essentially get it done. And they just weren't able to get it done, right? And, again, Derek Carr might not have been perfect, but there were moments where he was able to put up points. When you needed him to drive downfield, he was still able to do it. The guy was clutch. And I think for the Raiders, we finally have an actual quarterback that can kind of get it done. So I'm excited for this year, man. It's going to be very, 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 very exciting as we get into this year to really see what the Raiders can actually do and see how far we can push with this roster, with the quarterback situation as well. But there's a couple other reports that are coming out that I definitely want to talk about. There's some inside information coming in about the Las Vegas Raiders contract negotiations between the team and, of course, Kolton Miller. And this comes out from a real insider. That's going to be Vincent Bonsignore, who works for the Las Vegas Review Journal. If you guys don't know, Vinny basically, and I should see how I say this. So Vinny, in the past, I should say, was one of the guys that whenever the Raiders front office needed to put out information, Vinny was the guy that they would have went to. Mark Davis specifically, whenever a story needed to come out from the Raiders, this was the guy that they went to. Now, I don't know if this is actually any sort of insight from the team, but he's almost making it seem like the Raiders might actually move off of Kolton Miller, and they might be okay with it. Let me actually just read it from you guys from the actual report here. So here's the section with Kolton Miller where Vinny talks about it. He's saying Miller, 29, has been an anchor of the O-line since 2018. After a slow start last season while coming off off-season shoulder surgery, he delivered his typical high-level production. Miller has said he wants to be a Raider for life, and the club is open to re-signing him at the right price. Finding that common ground could be a challenge, and Miller, who plays a premium position at left tackle, has to consider his worth on the open market. Charles Grant, an athletic left tackle drafted in the 3rd round this year, could play a role in the decision. He's likely to use 2025 as a development season. Depending on his progress, he could take over for Miller in the 2026 season. Prediction, and this is what Vinny thinks. He's saying the Raiders will monitor Miller's effectiveness in coordinator Chip Kelly's offense while tracking Grant's development. They will be in a better position next spring to decide whether to reinvest in Miller, probably on a deal that pays him $20 to $23 million per season, or give Grant the job on his cost-effective rookie deal. Let's talk about this, man, because I almost feel like Vincent Bonsignore has some sort of insight. He's trying to tell us what we should kind of get ready for to potentially happen. Now, first and foremost, I think it's very important to realize Kolton Miller was the first one that put this report out, right? I guarantee you guys, Kolton Miller at some point this past offseason, probably sometime when John Spytek got hired, Kolton Miller probably reached out to John Spytek via his agent and said, hey, I want a new contract. I want to get extended. I want to be with the Raiders. We're going into the final year of my contract. I want to be here long term. Are you guys willing to extend me? At some point, John Spytek may have said, hey, let us look into it or whatever, and maybe just never got back to Kolton Miller on it. And the Raiders maybe not taking the initiative to just tell Kolton Miller, or even then, maybe they did tell Kolton Miller that, hey, we don't plan to extend you this season. Kolton Miller and his agent took it upon themselves to reach out to Jeremy Fowler, and they decided that we're going to make this public, right? We're essentially going to say Kolton Miller wants a new contract, and he's basically going to sit out at this point. Now, I also want to just reiterate, it is very, very normal for any player that's a top 10 to 15 player, especially at tackle, right? There's 64 starting tackles. If you're one of the top, 10 to 15 guys, you're not playing on your last year of your contract, right? You're just not doing it, especially if you're where Kolton Miller is. The guy's in his prime. This is going to be his last contract or major contract. Even Maxx Crosby was not willing to play on his last contract. He made it known very clear on his podcast that he was not willing to play on it and he wants a new contract. So Kolton Miller is doing what every single star player does. And with that, Kolton Miller took it upon himself, had Jeremy Fowler put the report out, and even said Miller was willing to hold out, which he did. He held out for the first week of OTAs. And I know it was basically voluntary. I understand that, but he still held out. He still put the report out there. And now we're not sure if he'll actually play when training camp comes around or if he plans to actually follow through and hold out when it matters the most. But with that, the Raiders might actually just play hardball and say, we're not going to pay you. We drafted Charles Grant. We don't think, we might not value what you bring. And I don't really know, to be honest, what John Spytek thinks. I'm not the biggest believer of John Spytek when it comes to offensive line play. And I say that only because of the fact that these guys drafted Graham Barton over Jackson Powers-Johnson. Not that Graham Barton's not a good center. He is, right? They took him in the first round. But Jackson Powers-Johnson, I think, is one of the top 2 guys already. Barton is probably a top 10 guy at this point. But Jackson Powers-Johnson is incredible. And if you wanted a center, Powers-Johnson should have been the first guy to go. And he wasn't. So again, that's just one example, right? We'll see how Caleb Rogers pans out. We'll see how Charles Grant pans out. But regardless of that, I look at what John Spytek and what Kolton Miller, what the agent and Spytek might have kind of going on. And then I read this report from a Raiders insider who could have real information on this. He's saying the deal might be between $20 to $23 million, right? The deal probably pays him somewhere in between this amount per season. This could also mean this is what the Raiders are willing to pay him, and Kolton Miller might want more. Now, I'll be the first to tell you guys, if Kolton Miller signs for $20 million, or that's what he was willing to take, I would sign him today. No questions asked. Even at $23 million, I would probably still sign him for probably a 2-year extension, as well as the upcoming year, right? I think $23 million is still fairly not that much for a starting caliber left tackle. That to a guy that's, Kolton Miller as a tackle, you get better. You can hit 30 and you can still be a lot better at 32 than you were at 30. Tackle's a position where you can be elite all the way up to you're like 34, 35, 36 years old. And generally speaking, you actually do get better as you get older. So $23 million to me would be perfectly fine, but there's a chance Miller might say, I want 26, 27 million. And in that instance, I think you have to lean away from that and then really consider going forward with Charles Grant. But I will also say this. If Kolton Miller does not plan to show up for training camp, if he doesn't plan to play this season for the Raiders, which I don't think he's going to do, but if he does, and you're okay with him sitting out, and you're okay with going forward with Charles Grant, at that point, you should just trade Kolton Miller. You could probably get a first-round pick, if not more, for him, in my opinion, right? There's teams, like the Bills, for example, which you probably wouldn't trade them because they're in the same conference as you, but you could potentially trade them to a team like that needs a left tackle, at least of the future. They still have Deion Dawkins, but he's probably getting ready to retire any year now. But with that, you can potentially pay a guy like Kolton Miller or trade him to the Bills, and it's a lower first-round pick, so you can get potentially more. But you could also potentially trade him to a team like the Dolphins that might need a left tackle. And we don't really know where the Dolphins are going to end up falling, so you can still potentially get more as well. But if the Raiders don't plan to keep Kolton Miller, you got to trade him, right? If you don't plan to pay him, the worst thing you can do is let the year play out, and then Kolton Miller decides, I'm not going to go back to the Raiders. They didn't want to pay me when that time mattered. Even if it's a different team that might take a little bit less, I'm going to just go there. Because players change their minds all the time, right? So, to me, I hope the Raiders actually lock in Kolton Miller. I can't say this enough. DJ Glaze might not be the future for the Raiders. And if you trade Kolton Miller and DJ Glaze is not the future, you're now betting that you're going to be able to find 2 offensive tackle positions, arguably the second and third most important positions on the entire offense. The Raiders got to lock this guy in. I think it'd be a huge mistake if they don't. Let's get into the final report that I want to kind of get into. If you guys have not heard, there was a big trade that happened earlier today where basically Jalen Ramsey and Geno Smith, both guys that played for the Dolphins, were actually traded to the Steelers. The Steelers ended up giving out Minkah Fitzpatrick as well as a 5th-round pick, which to me, I think it's a pretty fair trade on both sides. I think Geno Smith is a really, really good tight end. He hasn't really panned out, but the guy has the skill to be a good tight end. If he has a good quarterback, I think he can have success. You know, you're getting, if you're the Steelers, Jalen Ramsey, who's still, I think, a top 5 cornerback, and Geno Smith, who I think is a really, really good tight end with potential. He may not have realized it yet, but he has potential. You're trading those two guys to a team that's also giving you Minkah Fitzpatrick, who I think is one of the best safeties in the NFL. I think he's a top 5 safety, probably a top 15 overall defensive player. And the Dolphins might have gotten the better side of it a little bit because they get Minkah Fitzpatrick, but also realize the Steelers are not the Raiders, right? The Steelers draft really, really, really well, and they develop really, really well. So, yeah, they're getting rid of Minkah Fitzpatrick, but guess what? They probably have another guy coming in. You know, they might even be shopping TJ Watt, and I'll be the first to tell you guys, they're going to replace him real quick. And I understand people might disagree with that, but just look over the years what the Steelers have been able to do on the defensive side, right? They just continuously turn talent around and bring in other guys. And, you know, regardless of that, the Raiders basically missed out on Jalen Ramsey. But now some people are saying, hey, what if the Raiders could potentially trade Michael Mayer to the Dolphins? And apparently, you know, it's a possibility, right? CBS Reports is putting it out there that the Dolphins have interest in Raiders tight end Michael Mayer after trading Geno Smith to the Steelers per report. So this is coming out here where apparently the Dolphins are actually interested in Michael Mayer. And I think it's a very, very, very interesting report. So here's the actual report. So according to a new report from the Miami Herald, one of the tight ends the Dolphins have interest in is Las Vegas Raiders pass catcher Michael Mayer. Omar Kelly reported that the Dolphins have had their eyes on Mayer for a while. He may be someone to watch as a trade target. Let's talk about this report as we kind of wrap this video up. You know, I'm a huge, huge, huge believer that if a guy doesn't have success in year 1, in year 2, even year 3 potential, you give them as long as it takes because sometimes guys develop, right? You know when a guy's a bust, right? Let's just be honest. You have Cleveland Farrell, he sucks. You know it. You know he's not a good player. You know he's a bust. Even Tyree Wilson, we haven't seen anything from him really in the first 2 years. There's some upside. There's some potential. He might still pan out. There's some hope. But generally speaking, you know guys that are good, guys that are not good. Michael Mayer's good. I don't know. You know, he might not have been worth the 34th overall pick. He might not have been worth the trade up for. But the guy's a good tight end. And we have to realize that most tight ends around the NFL are not Brock Bowers. That is a rare, absolute rare thing, right? You take away the top 5 tight ends, right? The very, very 5 best. What you get from like the 6th best tight end down to like the 30th best tight end is very, very similar production. And Michael Mayer is somewhere in there. If Michael Mayer gets 100 targets, he'll put up 1,000 yards. But the thing with Michael Mayer that makes him legit is the guy's a really, really good blocker. And early on, he struggled. I was very critical of his blocking. But the guy's developed, and last year, especially at the end of the year, he was crushing people. And I think we're going to see it a lot more this year because our offense this year is a lot better in terms of the actual play caller, in terms of the actual install of the offense. But we do have to recognize, or just taking a step back, now Michael Mayer is a skilled player. And I think for the Raiders, you know, if it's like a 5th round pick potentially, I'm not doing it. I'd rather have Michael Mayer here for the next 2 years because he's going to make your offense that much better. I'd rather have him here for the next 2 years than trading him for a 4th or 5th round pick. In fact, I would not trade Michael Mayer unless it's a 1st or a 2nd round pick. You're not going to get a 1st round pick, but if they're not willing to give you a 2nd round pick, I would not trade him at this point. I would rather have a Michael Mayer than like a 3rd round pick or any other pick below that. Maybe I'd swap him for a player, right? The Dolphins, they have some good players, right? So maybe you swap them for one of their offensive linemen potentially if you feel like you need an offensive lineman. Maybe it's Tyreek Hill. Who knows, right? I know Tyreek Hill wants to get moved. If I'm the Raiders, I am sticking with Michael Mayer, but it is interesting that the Dolphins are interested. And again, the Dolphins just traded with Geno Smith, so they have a need for a good tight end. And, you know, Mike McDaniel, who might, you know, this might be his final year with the Dolphins. If he doesn't have success, if they win 6 games, he's being fired. If for him to have success and for him to be able to kind of do his thing, he needs good football players. And I think Michael Mayer would be a really, really good fit for that offense because the guy's a really good run blocker. He could pass block, he could chip, he could release, he could influence, he could help the offensive lineman. He's just a really, really, really good productive football player. And again, part of that production, you got to realize is he's not getting targets. He was also in a Luke Getsy offense last year. He just didn't have the targets, right? He just didn't have the opportunities. And then, of course, I think a lot of people don't recognize run blocking and the value, right? Like the really good tight ends versus the really poor tight ends. You don't really notice it unless you're watching tape. And I'm telling you guys, Mclaurin is a legit blocker. So we'll see what ends up happening. I hope the Raiders do stick with him. I definitely would if it was up to me. But I want to know what you guys think. What are your guys' thoughts? Drop a comment down below. And I will see you guys next time with another video.